The church bells tolled a mournful rhythm, echoing in her chest like a hammer. Her heart pounded in sync with each chime, her thoughts scattered and her breath coming in sharp gasps. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet, the stems biting into her palm, yet the pain did little to calm her. He stood before her, eyes like daggers, his lips set in a cold line that spoke of a world she no longer recognized. Her gaze wandered to the crowd, but all she saw was his face, standing there, a stranger in the place of someone she had once known. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice broke, barely a whisper in the air. The words fell like shards of glass between them, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until it was broken by a voice from the back of the room. "I never wanted this. Not with you." The words cutting through her like a blade, each syllable sinking deeper into her soul. She could feel her knees weaken, but somehow, she stood tall, unwilling to let the gravity of the moment drag her down. The life she had dreamed of was collapsing, piece by piece, and she had no choice but to watch it crumble. The air in the church was thick with the weight of unspoken words. She stood there trembling, unable to move. Every gaze felt like a hot brand against her skin, yet no one could understand the turmoil churning inside her. The man she had loved, the one who had promised her forever, had betrayed her before her very eyes. It was not just a betrayal of her trust, but of everything she had believed about the world. Was it her fault for not seeing it sooner? Was this the way life worked? The questions spiraled in her mind, each one sinking deeper into her chest like an anchor, pulling her further into despair. The man she had dreamed of walking beside for the rest of her life was now a stranger in her heart. And yet, there was a flicker of something still left, something unresolved. Did he love her, or was this always a lie? She wasn't sure, but she knew she needed answers. This night couldn't end without them. She finally moved, though her feet felt like lead. Each step was a battle against the weight of the silence pressing down on her. Her eyes darted across the room, landing on faces she had once known, now unfamiliar and distant. She had never felt more alone in her life. The truth that had been laid bare in front of her was suffocating, but she couldn't bring herself to escape it. "I trusted you," she whispered to the empty air, as though somehow he would hear her words despite his absence. The walls of the church seemed to close in on her, the sound of her footsteps growing louder with each step. She could feel the warmth of the candles as she passed them, yet there was no warmth left inside her. The coolness of betrayal had frozen her heart. As she reached the door, the night outside beckoned, promising nothing but darkness. And yet, it was the only place she could go. She stepped outside, the cool night air biting at her skin. She paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The moon was high, casting a pale light over the empty streets. She was alone. The sounds of the night seemed distant, as if muffled by the storm raging inside her. There was no escape, no hiding from the reality that had shattered her. She had no idea where to go, but she couldn't stay here. The thought of returning to her empty home, to the place where their life had been built, was unbearable. "Where do I go from here?" she whispered to herself, the question echoing in the stillness. But there were no answers in the night, only the bitter taste of betrayal and the hollow emptiness of a future she could no longer recognize. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement as she walked, each one a reminder that she was no longer the person she had been just hours ago. Her mind raced with thoughts she could not control. Could she ever trust again? Should she have seen this coming? The uncertainty gnawed at her insides, but the silence was worse. She had always believed in love, in its power to heal and to bind, but now she wasn't sure what was real anymore. Everything had changed in an instant, and she was left to pick up the pieces. But she couldn't stay in this moment forever. She had to move forward, even if she didn't know how. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to walk it alone. The days after the church were a blur. She wandered through life like a ghost, disconnected from everything and everyone. It wasn't just the wedding, it was everything. The betrayal had been a sharp, jagged wound that refused to heal. Every room she entered felt colder, as if her heart was no longer capable of warmth. Her nights were haunted by dreams of the wedding, faces blurred by tears, promises shattered, and the cold, empty space where the groom should have been. She couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of his absence, and yet the emptiness he left behind seemed to fill every inch of her life. She longed for the comfort of the past, for the illusion of happiness she had once lived in. But that life was gone. The stranger had taken it all. "How could you do this?" she whispered to the darkness of her room, unsure whether she was speaking to him or to the world itself. She sat on the edge of her bed, the silence suffocating, pressing in on her. It was as if she was drowning in it, but no one could see her struggle. She had to leave. The weight of the house, the memories, it was too much. Each corner whispered of him, his voice, his laughter, the smell of his cologne. She couldn't stay here, not like this. But where would she go? Her friends had moved on, her family distant, too far removed from her pain to understand. She had no one left to turn to, no place to hide. The stranger's betrayal had stripped away her foundation, leaving her adrift in a world that no longer felt like hers. She needed to escape, even if only for a moment. But with every passing hour, the weight of her choices pressed on her. Was she running, or was she looking for something she could never find? The answer eluded her. She only knew one thing: she couldn't remain here in this prison of memories any longer. It was time to step into the unknown. She arrived at a small, quaint cafe in the middle of the city. It was a place she used to visit with him, but now it felt different. The air was thick with memories she couldn't shake, yet she was desperate to fill the void. The smell of fresh coffee, the low murmur of conversations, everything about the cafe was both familiar and foreign. She found a corner table, far enough from the door so she wouldn't have to see anyone, yet close enough to feel the pulse of life around her. She ordered a coffee, her hands shaking as she lifted the cup to her lips. The warmth was comforting, but it didn't soothe the ache inside her. She wanted to scream, to break something, but all she could do was sit in silence, the weight of the world pressing down on her. Every sip she took seemed to deepen the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. The life she had imagined for herself, the future, it all lay in ruins. The stranger had taken it all, and she was left to pick up the pieces. It was a week before she finally gathered the courage to meet with her closest friend. They sat in a park, the autumn air crisp against her skin, the fallen leaves rustling beneath their feet. She hadn't wanted to share what had happened, but the silence was killing her. She needed to talk, to unburden herself to someone who might understand. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew what love was. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now, I'm just lost." Her friend listened, not interrupting, just letting her words spill out. But when she finished, the silence stretched between them like an unspoken agreement that some wounds could never be healed. She looked at her friend, hoping for some kind of answer, but all she received was a blank stare. "You'll find your way," her friend said softly, but the words felt hollow. The truth was, neither of them knew where she was headed, only that she had to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the path. That night, the emptiness of her apartment felt suffocating. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what had happened. The stranger's face haunted her in the dark, his betrayal a shadow she couldn't outrun. But beneath the anger and the hurt, there was something else, something she hadn't been ready to confront until now. A part of her still longed for him, still wanted to believe that things could go back to the way they were. It was a dangerous hope, a flicker of light in the depths of her despair. But she couldn't ignore it any longer. Her heart, though battered and bruised, still beat for him. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, and she wasn't sure whether to fight it or surrender to it. Could she ever forgive him? Could she ever trust him again? The questions lingered in the air, unanswered, as she drifted into a fitful sleep. The city was alive with movement, but she felt like a ghost walking through it. People brushed past her, oblivious, while her heart beat with a frantic rhythm. She had to keep moving. The constant thoughts of betrayal had consumed her for weeks. But now, there was a new face in her life, someone who made her feel seen again. It was impossible to deny the pull she felt toward him. Every word he spoke seemed to fill the void left by the stranger's absence. And yet, with every moment of connection, a gnawing fear settled in her chest. Was she using him to fill the emptiness, or was there something real there? Every time he smiled at her, she caught a flicker of doubt in her mind. Could she trust again? Could she love again? After everything that had happened? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't stop herself from hoping. Hope, she realized, was dangerous. But without it, what was left? He called her again. His voice was smooth, reassuring, like he could fix all the cracks in her heart with a single word. She had resisted before, but today she found herself answering. His words were sweet, but there was something more beneath them, something too comforting, something that made her stomach twist. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said. "I'm here for you." She wanted to believe him, she truly did. But each time he spoke, the past came rushing back, dragging her into memories she wasn't ready to confront. She wanted the connection he offered, but she was scared. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of being deceived once more. "Why do you want to help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was silence on the other end. And then, a simple answer. "Because I care about you." But she wasn't sure if she could trust anyone again, not after what happened. The night felt colder than it had in years. She stood outside the building, staring at the door that led to the stranger's apartment. The memories of their time together rushed back, how everything had seemed perfect, how every word he spoke had felt like truth. But truth, as she had learned, was a fleeting thing. And tonight, she wasn't sure what she would find behind that door. She had come here to face him, to demand answers, to find closure. But as she raised her hand to knock, her heart skipped a beat. What if he was the same man he had been before? What if nothing had changed, and all her pain had been for nothing? She hesitated, the weight of her decision heavy on her chest. The past had a way of holding you captive, of keeping you in its grip long after you had moved on. And tonight, she wasn't sure if she was ready to let go. The door opened, and there he stood. The stranger, but not quite. His face was familiar, yet so distant, as if he had been a ghost haunting her memories. "I didn't expect you to come," he said, his voice low and almost apologetic. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She had dreamed of this moment of confronting him, but now that it was here, it felt like an impossible task. He stepped aside, silently offering her entry, but she hesitated. Was this where it ended? Could they really fix what had been broken, or was this just another chapter in a story that had already ended? Her heart raced as she crossed the threshold, unsure of what she was about to face, but knowing she couldn't turn back. This was the confrontation she had been avoiding for so long. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. "Why did you do it?" Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the air like a knife. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you leave me in the dark, wondering what was real?" His eyes, once filled with warmth, now seemed distant, cold. He looked away for a moment, almost as if he couldn't bear to meet her gaze. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said softly, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth." She shook her head, her chest tightening with frustration. "The truth," she repeated bitterly. "You could have told me at any point, but you chose silence. You chose to let me suffer." The anger in her voice surprised even her, but she didn't care. It had taken her so long to get here, to face him. And now, with the truth finally on the table, she realized it was too late. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she whispered, the tears threatening to spill. But I needed to hear it. I needed to understand why. The truth had been buried under layers of secrets, but now it surfaced with a force that she couldn't ignore. She stared at the letter in her hands, its contents burning into her mind. Everything she had believed was wrong, twisted by lies. The man she thought she knew, the one who had professed love, was part of a web far darker than she could have imagined. The betrayal was deeper than just the broken promise of marriage. It was the foundation of her reality itself. Every moment with him, every smile, every touch. Was it all a manipulation? A game? She could feel the walls of her world collapsing. The stranger had been playing her, and she was only now beginning to see the extent of the damage. How long had he known? How long had he been hiding the truth? Her hands shook as she dropped the letter onto the table, her heart hammering in her chest. There was no going back. The truth had been unleashed, and she had to face it, no matter how painful. She couldn't breathe, not because of the letter itself, but because of the weight of what it meant. The man who had once been her world was now an enemy. She remembered their first meeting, how he had made her feel safe, seen, loved. Now, all of that seemed like a lie. Her fingers traced the edges of the letter as her mind raced. The truth twisted within her, a bitter poison that spread through her veins. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she couldn't. The only thing left was silence, and in it, the cold realization that everything she thought she knew had been a lie. How could she have been so blind? How had she let herself be deceived? She was trapped in a cage of her own making, and the bars were the lies he had fed her. The weight of this truth pressed on her chest, suffocating her. And yet part of her still wanted to believe in him, in the person she had thought he was. But it was too late. The truth had shattered everything. It was him. The man she had trusted, the one she had given her heart to, was behind the deception. Her fingers trembled as she replayed the words in her head, trying to make sense of the chaos. He had been manipulating her from the beginning, and now, she was left with nothing but the broken pieces of her own trust. How could she have been so blind? Every conversation, every gesture now felt like a carefully crafted performance. She remembered how he would always deflect when she asked the hard questions, how he had always kept certain things hidden. It had all been part of a plan, a strategy to keep her in the dark. And now, the truth was undeniable. The man who had claimed to love her had lied to her from the start. She was a fool to have believed in him, but she couldn't undo the past. The only thing she could do now was face the reality that she had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. She had to confront him. There was no more running, no more pretending. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too numerous. But as she prepared herself to face him, doubt crept in. What if he was still lying? What if this was just another part of his manipulation? She could feel her hands shake as she reached for the door, every step toward it, a battle against her own fear. She wasn't ready for this confrontation. She wasn't ready to hear more lies. But she couldn't keep living in this limbo, in this constant state of confusion. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth. And even if it destroyed her, at least she would have closure. The door loomed in front of her like a wall, but there was no turning back now. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. When the door opened, she almost didn't recognize him. The man who stood before her was different. His face, once so familiar, now felt foreign. He seemed almost too calm, as if he had been expecting her all along. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, his voice flat, lacking the warmth that had once drawn her in. She wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but all she could do was stand there, staring at him. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why did you do this to me?" His eyes softened for a moment, but only for a fleeting second before they hardened again. "I never meant for you to get hurt, but I had my reasons, things you wouldn't understand." The words sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't even sorry. There was no regret, no apology, just the cold distance of a man who had always known what he was doing. And in that moment, she knew. The man she had loved was gone. There was nothing left but a stranger. The room was thick with the silence of unresolved words. She stood facing him, her heart pounding in her chest, but no longer with the intensity of anger or betrayal. Instead, there was emptiness, a hollow ache. The man she had loved, the man who had promised to be by her side, was now a stranger. His words, once laced with affection, now felt like hollow echoes. You never really saw me, did you? She asked quietly, the question more to herself than to him. He flinched, just barely, but there was no apology in his eyes, no regret. I never wanted to hurt you, he said again, but this time the words felt meaningless, like a rehearsed script. She could feel the weight of everything she had lost, her dreams, her trust, her belief in love. The future she had imagined was gone. And as much as it pained her, she realized that she was standing in the wreckage of her past, unable to rebuild what had once been. I don't know who you are anymore, she whispered, the words a final goodbye. Do you even care that you've ruined everything? Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. The question was simple, yet the answer was anything but. He didn't respond immediately, and in that silence she could feel the weight of all the years she had spent believing in him, in them. The person she had entrusted with her heart had turned out to be a stranger in disguise. The walls that had once felt like a safe fortress now felt like a prison. I gave you everything, she whispered. And you took it all, like it meant nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words could. She could see it in his eyes, the coldness, the detachment. He wasn't sorry. He had never been sorry. She had been nothing but a pawn in his game, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. I have nothing left to give you, she said finally, turning away from him. I can't do this anymore. She didn't know where to go. The streets outside felt foreign, as if the world she once knew had been erased, leaving her adrift in a sea of unfamiliar faces and places. She walked aimlessly, the sounds of the city a blur in her ears, her mind lost in a fog. The hurt was still raw, but something inside her had shifted. She had come to a realization. She couldn't keep living in the past. She had to move forward, even if she didn't know how. As she walked, her steps became steadier, the weight of her decision settling in. She couldn't undo what had been done, but she could choose how to respond. The past was gone, but the future was still hers to shape. She wasn't sure what it would look like, but she knew it had to be different. No more lies, no more illusions. Just her, standing on the edge of an uncertain tomorrow. She had always been afraid of being alone, of facing the world without someone by her side. But now, as the city skyline stretched before her, she realized that being alone wasn't the same as being lost. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something that had long been absent: hope. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was enough. She wasn't the same person she had been when she walked into that church, when she had believed in forever. But that wasn't a bad thing. She had shed the layers of someone else's expectations, someone else's lies, and now she had the chance to rebuild herself. This was her second chance, and for once, she wasn't afraid to take it. I can do this, she whispered to herself, the words feeling like a promise. The past would always be a part of her, but it wouldn't define her anymore. She was free. She had waited for this moment, for what felt like an eternity. And now that it was here, she felt both lighter and heavier. The weight of the past was still there, but it didn't hold her anymore. She had finally let go, and in doing so she had found herself again. The man who had betrayed her was a distant memory, a shadow fading into the background of her life. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about survival. She had to survive. And in that survival, she had found strength. As she walked away from the past, she realized something important. She didn't need anyone to complete her. She was already whole. The last vestiges of doubt faded as she took another step into the unknown. The future was unwritten, but she was ready to write it herself. The morning was quiet, a sense of calm settling over the world. She stood at the window, watching the soft light of dawn creep across the sky, painting everything in warm golden hues. It was a new day, and for the first time in a long while she felt peace. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer held her captive. She had moved through the storm, and now she was ready to embrace the stillness. There was no more anger, no more bitterness, only the gentle hum of acceptance. The city below was waking up, each person beginning their own journey. She had once believed that her story had ended, that the heartbreak would define her forever. But now, she saw it differently. The scars she carried were not weaknesses. They were reminders of how far she had come. "It's time to move on," she whispered to herself, the words a quiet affirmation that life, despite everything, was still worth living. The phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her reverie. She didn't recognize the number, but something urged her to answer. The voice on the other end was familiar, though it sent a shiver down her spine. "It's me," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. She didn't respond at first, unsure of how to feel. So many questions flooded her mind. Was he calling to apologize, to explain, or to continue where they had left off? "I wanted to hear your voice," he continued, the words soft but desperate. She could hear the sincerity in his tone, but the memories of their past still echoed in her mind. The lies, the deceit, they were too fresh. "I can't keep running from the past," he said. "I need to make things right." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Part of her wanted to say yes, to hear the apology she had waited for, but another part of her knew that forgiveness wasn't a gift she could give him, not yet. She hung up the phone, the silence enveloping her once more. The words he had spoken lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions. She wasn't ready. Not yet. The man on the other end of the line, the man she had once trusted, had torn her world apart. She knew she couldn't just let go of that. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about healing. She had to take her time, to allow herself to rebuild the pieces of her heart that had been shattered. She sat down on the couch, her hands resting on her lap, the stillness of the room a mirror to the quiet turmoil within her. The past had tried to define her, to hold her in its grasp, but she wasn't going to let it anymore. "I'm better off alone," she whispered softly to herself, finding strength in those words. It wasn't the absence of love that made her strong, but the courage to face the future on her own terms. The days passed, each one a small victory, a step forward into a new life she was slowly beginning to carve out for herself. She started meeting new people, opening up to friendships she hadn't realized she was missing. The void left by him was still there, but it wasn't as all-consuming as before. She had learned to find joy in the small moments again, the laughter of friends, the warmth of a good book, the peace that came with silence. She didn't need anyone to complete her. She was already whole. "I'm not afraid anymore," she told herself one evening as she walked through the park, the cool air crisp against her skin. It felt like a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The pain had faded, replaced by a quiet hope. She had survived the worst of it. Now she was ready to live. She stood at the edge of a quiet, calm lake, the water reflecting the colors of the sunset. It was beautiful, peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with herself. The past was a part of her, but it didn't define her anymore. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by betrayal. She was stronger now, wiser. As the breeze rippled across the surface of the lake, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the moment fill her. She had come so far, farther than she had ever thought possible. The man who had betrayed her no longer had power over her. She had taken back her life piece by piece, and now she was whole again. "I'm free," she whispered softly, the words carrying a sense of finality. She smiled, knowing that the future was wide open, waiting for her to step into it. Years had passed, and now as she stood before the window, the city below felt like a distant memory. The pain had faded, replaced by strength. She had built a life from the ashes, no longer defined by the man who once held her heart. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. The future was hers to write. She had faced the storm and emerged stronger. No longer did she need validation from others. Happiness was something she had learned to create within herself. Each day she grew more certain that she had made the right choice in leaving the past behind. Walking through the park, she felt at peace. The little moments, the simple joys of life, now brought her more happiness than she could have imagined. Happiness wasn't something stolen from her. It was always inside her, waiting to be rediscovered. She had finally embraced her own company, finding comfort in the quiet. The small moments of solitude now felt like a gift. The past no longer haunted her. She had found the strength to move forward. I've learned to love myself, she thought, feeling empowered. She had waited for this moment for so long, and now, with the future ahead, she knew that she was ready. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. With newfound strength, she smiled softly, knowing that her journey had just begun.